3 minutes after 10. Do you remember when we were kids and occasionally you'd get a little announcement on the radio because people didn't have mobile phones and things like that, and it would actually break into the radio to say, would Keith Bloggs please ring home because there is an emergency, or there is I just want to say to my own family, if the highly unlikely event that they are listening, I've got far more important things to do, like GCSEs. Can you believe it? Where does the time go? I'm not really thinking of cancelling the summer holiday independently. I mean, number one, I wouldn't be allowed to. Number two, I don't particularly want to. And number three, it's certainly not something I would even undertake, even contemplate. Well, I am contemplating it, so that doesn't quite work. It's not something I would begin to undertake without a full and frank familial consultation. But Heathrow's boss is warning that there could be 18 months of disruption at our airports. Not for the first time, and certainly not for the last time. I do wonder about the curious alchemy of deciding what the big stories of the moment are. And tragically, these decisions continue to be made in this country, in large part by newspapers that are, I mean, quite deliberately and unapologetically biased in the favour, usually, of their owners. And even independent broadcast has to, I think, sometimes subconsciously follow that lead. If a story is on the front page of all the right-wing newspapers, can, for example, the BBC ignore it? Can ITV ignore it? Can LBC ignore it? If it's on the front page of all the right-wing newspapers, even if it's only there because it serves the interests of the various viscounts and non-domiciled plutocrats and sort of quasi-aristocrats that have bought newspapers or inherited newspapers solely to protect their own status and wealth, the rest of us kind of follow a little bit. So I don't know. I honestly don't know. As I get older, I don't care as much as I used to. It's a bit like trying to get angry about the fact that the tide comes in. That is the way the world works. As long as there are a few people around like you and me to point it out and remind everybody else that it is, if not a full Matrix situation, then certainly an interpretation of reality rather than an objective reflection of reality, then we should all be okay. I'm also... Oh, no, it's one of those days, isn't it? What day is it, Keith? Is it Wednesday? Well, all day. So we've got PMQs coming up at 12, and I've gone off, I can tell by about 6 minutes past the hour, whether or not I'm going to go off on a slightly meandering introduction to the programme. They're not always meandering. Look, I sometimes use far more words than is necessary, and indeed words containing far more syllables than is necessary, but I'm pretty clear about what the point of the introduction to the programme is. Today is one of those days where I can feel slightly odd impulses popping up like kernels of corn in the overheated cauldron of my brain. Because I'm about to do another thing that has very little to do with the question I'm about to ask you. I'm about to apologise to people who can't answer it. Because the cost of living crisis remains the biggest problem facing this country, and yet, of course, unless there's an opportunity for some ludicrous and largely fallacious shilling on behalf of Boris Johnson, then the Daily Mail probably won't go near it. The Daily Telegraph, if you're interested in such things, has now, I think, completed the process of turning on Boris Johnson. So I need a new catchphrase. I can no longer say that the Daily Telegraph is to Boris Johnson as the Beano is to Dennis the Menace. I suppose I can say the Daily Telegraph was to Boris Johnson as the Beano is to Dennis the Menace, but it's not quite as catchy. I have it on dubious authority that the main reason why the Daily Telegraph has turned on Boris Johnson is because he hasn't given a peerage to the owner's family. And they look at all the people who have got peerages, including various previous denizens of the Revolutionary Communist Party, who Boris Johnson has put in the House of Lords, sons of KGB agents who've been described as key members of Vladimir Putin's inner circle by the Canadian government. That's the father, not the son. His own brother got a seat in the House of Lords. Zach Goldsmith got rewarded for losing more elections than Jeremy Corbyn by getting a seat in the House of Lords. I mean, goodness me, how low do you have to go to get a seat in the House of Lords off Boris Johnson? Pick your favourite. Daniel Hannan is a baron. Pick your favourite. And then, I'm not suggesting you get your violin out for the owners of the Daily Telegraph, but it has been whispered in my ear that one of the main reasons behind the editorial switch over there is absolute fury that none of the owners' family have received an honour peerage from Boris Johnson, while various flotsam and jetsam of political life have been ennobled. I don't know. As I just thought, I thought you'd appreciate that little nugget of gossip. So I apologise to you if you're not going on holiday this summer for having a conversation about holidays. And I say that with sort of 52% just straight sincerity and 48% regret, because I wish you were going on holiday. But if people in their millions are struggling to eat, it doesn't take Einstein to realise that means people in their millions aren't even going to be thinking about going on holiday. So I won't be sharing major details of my plans, except to say that, we generally holiday in Greece, and I haven't been for years. It feeds my soul on different levels, like no other holiday does. When I get to Greece, something about the light and the soil beneath my feet, the culture and the people touches me in ways that have been enriching and improving my life since I was 19 years old and started going out with a Greek girl. I mean, that is it for me. It is the land of my, if not of my dreams, it's the land of my soul nourishment. And you either get that or you don't. And that's why I can't wait to get there. In about a month is the plan. But for the first time today, it was this story, actually, that grabbed me by the proverbials. Hours before they were due to fly home from a week in Greece, in this case Corfu, Jo Rouse and her family were awoken by a 4 a.m. text from EasyJet telling them their flight was cancelled. Now, I don't know what you're like on holiday. And it's highly unlikely I'll ever find out, to be honest with you, unless there's a very curious turn of the world. But I used to get quite antsy for the first 2 or 3 days. Do you recognise that? Do you get antsy for the first 2 or 3 days? I used to find it quite hard to relax. This is before I had therapy a few years ago and sort of changed the way I look at the world and changed the way I feel about things. But holidays, it was almost like I'd drunk too much coffee for the first 2 or 3 days of a holiday. I always found it I was too focused perhaps on what was going on back home. Who's doing my holiday cover? What's happening in the news? Am I missing a story? What's going on? How on earth have I ended up making a living doing something as ridiculous as spluttering into a microphone at 10 o'clock every morning? Oh my God, who's doing this? What's going on? And then by about day 3 or 4 of the holiday, I'd be thinking, who was that idiot fretting about what was going on back home? Just beginning to relax. That's why I always try and go away for a fortnight. Because the worst thing would be to go away for a week and to be frantic until day 3/4 and then be coming home on day 7 and going back to work on day 8. So I always had that. And I just had a little worry this morning when I read that story that I was going to get it again this year, because you're going to get there and you're going to spend the whole holiday worrying that your flight home might be cancelled. And listen, for me, it's not the end of the world. I'm sure that David Lammy will be glad of the extra shifts here at LBC if I have to stay on holiday for a couple more days or I can't get back. And we got enough cash to cover the cost of finding somewhere, all of that malarkey. It wouldn't actually be like it was in the days when you've and I've been there, when you've spent pretty much every penny you can afford. In fact, our honeymoon was like that. If we'd run out of money on our honeymoon, obviously not you and me, we haven't been on a honeymoon, but the honeymoon I went on with my wife, if we'd run out of money on that, we would have run out of money. We'd have had to ring home and beg our friends and family the cash to help us pay for our flight. But there was nothing left until the next payday. If you're interested in such details, it was partly because we didn't move in with each other until we got back from honeymoon, and we'd paid for the wedding ourselves. So you can imagine the chunk that took out of our 20-somethings savings and income. So we were literally waiting for the next payday before we could go on a supermarket shop when we got back from honeymoon. So I remember what that was like, and I'm not in that category now. But the idea of either struggling to get away, getting to the airport and finding these cattle market type queues of people, exacerbated, of course, on the way back, that now we've got our wonderful new blue passports. We have to queue for ages when previously we didn't. Because who here can honestly say that the amount of time you spend queuing on your way home from Europe is more important than the shade of your passport? Who here can honestly say that people who thought the shade of their passport was more important than the number of countries into and out of which it provided free movement is less important? I mean, what sort of idiot would think that the number of countries into and out of which you can enjoy free movement was somehow more important than whether your passport was bright yellow, pale pink, black, blue or burgundy? I mean, that's one thing at least post-Brexit we can all agree on. The most important thing about a passport is not the ports through which it lets you pass, but it's the colour of the cover that the passport is contained within. I'm very glad to clear that up. And here we are, genuinely worried that the holiday I have planned in a month from now may be more stressful than any before, and it may actually leave me feeling a little bit antsy and possibly even more stressed at times than I was before I went on a holiday that is much needed in order for stress alleviation reasons. And there it is. You've got ministers facing growing calls last night to bring in tougher penalties for airlines which overbook flights. I don't understand why they would do that. You've got the boss of Heathrow warning of 18 months of air disruption. You've got talk of cowboy carriers. You've got people stuck in Corfu. You've got queues in British airports that are like cattle markets. You've got people not getting away at all. You've got flights being cancelled at the very last minute, both on the way out, on the way in again. You've got check-in staff and ground handlers apparently enduring epic staff shortages that mean there's never any chance in the first place of getting it done. So we'll do what we can sometimes do. Quite a few of you pointing out that it is almost certain if I do go to Greece that will be the point at which Boris Johnson's government falls, because that's how things usually unfold. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. And I would miss that, actually, but not enough to come home, even if there was a flight. So I want to hear from people in three categories, I think. I want to hear from people who are in the business, 0345 6060973. I want to hear from people who are in the middle of the story, whose holidays have been turned upside down, or whose holiday plans have been turned upside down by what is unfolding. And the third category is people who've got their face closer to the screen than I have, people who've got a really clear bead on what is going on. The broad question is, should Brits rethink their overseas holiday plans, because the chaos is predicted to last for ages? But obviously, I want to know whether or not the chaos is going to last for 18 months. And here's the thing. Here's the elephant in the room, perhaps. All the talk about cowboy carriers and ministers facing growing calls to bring in tougher penalties, and airlines blaming Brexit, and Boris Johnson's cabinet blaming anything but the Brexit. They'll be blaming the boogie next, never mind the sunshine and the moonlight. But here's the thing I don't know. This is unavoidable, I think, isn't it? That if the problem is a shortage of bodies, if the fundamental flaw in the system right now is a shortage of bodies, then none of this is going to get fixed anytime soon. So that would be perhaps an angle for people in the industry. So I want pilots, I want air crew, I want baggage handlers, I want ground staff, I want travellers, I want tourists, I want plane spotters, anybody qualified to answer the question of how bad is it? 03456060973. How bad is it going to get? 03456060973. And is it worth us thinking about holidaying at home or genuinely having a bit of a rethink? I guess if you've been away and it's been a nightmare, in part, you can tell me whether or not you wish you hadn't gone at all. Phone lines are open, quite specific questions this morning, so if you're interested in such things, that's usually an opportunity it's a little easier to get on air than it is when I invite you to vent your political spleen, and you can do so in all the usual ways, but the best way is always on the phone, and the number you need is 0345 6060973. It's 10:17. 20 minutes after 10, and some rather grim news for you from Germany just breaking. Authorities there say a vehicle drove into pedestrians earlier this morning, injuring several people. There are reports of one death. A spokesman for Berlin police said the incident happened near the popular Kurfürstendamm shopping boulevard in the west of the German capital. The suspected driver of the vehicle has been detained. It's currently unclear whether the incident was the result of an accident or whether the driver had intentionally driven into the crowd. He was, at the time of this bulletin, 14 minutes ago, unable to confirm immediately a report by the public broadcaster RBB that at least 10 people had been injured. And as I mentioned, reports elsewhere that although I'm not seeing many instances of this report, so we'll probably scratch that for the time being, but several injured according to initial reports after a car drove into a crowd in West Berlin, with the police saying that they have detained the suspected driver of the vehicle, but it is unclear at this point whether the incident was an accident or an attack. Stay tuned for that. It puts a slightly grisly interpretation, doesn't it, upon the question I was asking lightheartedly just 5 minutes ago, as in should I cancel my summer holiday? But we are, of course, talking about the travel industry and specifically about airports, aircraft and air travel. How bad is it? How bad is it going to get? And should we be thinking about changing our plans this summer? Let's start with Anne-Marie, who's in Lisbon. Anne-Marie, what do you think?
Morning, James.
Hello.
Big fan.
Thank you. You must be if you're listening to me on holiday.
Yes, I listen to you on holiday. So
Keith doesn't. Even Keith doesn't listen to me on holiday, Anne-Marie. But anyway, sorry to interrupt. What did you ring in to tell me?
Keith is missing out.
I agree.
Yeah, yes. So my story started fairly nervous leaving Bristol, but we did get on our flight to Porto.
Right.
And we arrived on the 2nd of June. So we were holidaying around the north of Portugal. And the day before we were due to fly home, we'd got a message to say that EasyJet were using what they called a trusted partner to fly us home.
Right.
So I was a little nervous by the change of carrier, but hey-ho. And then on the morning of that we were due to fly home, which was the 7th of June, we were told it was cancelled. And we were a good hour and a half from Porto, so we were out sightseeing.
Right.
And then desperately trying to, thankfully our provider 3 does actually have roaming in coverage, because you're obviously on your phone using all of your data to desperately to try everything. So if you don't have roaming, you're going to be doubly in trouble.
Why on earth would you not have roaming, Anne-Marie?
I have no idea. Something happened. An anniversary coming up soon. Me neither.
No.
So thankfully, I chose my operator based on needing roaming.
So sorry, just forgive me. I'm trying to keep an eye on events in Berlin for obvious reasons, while also listening to you. When did the news drop? How were when did you get the news that you weren't going to be flying as you expected to be, and when were you expecting to fly?
So we were supposed to fly home on the 7th of June at 9 o'clock at night. We got the message first thing in the morning of the 7th of June.
Okay, so yesterday, in old money, you were supposed to be flying yesterday evening. You got the message yesterday morning that you wouldn't be flying, and here you are still in Lisbon. Yes,
but I was in Porto, James. So that's where we flew in and out of.
So you've made your way to Lisbon because you think you've got a better chance of getting a flight from there?
Yeah, there's literally nothing. So as I'm on my phone trying to manage the disruption, they keep asking for your booking reference, keep asking for your name, you're trying to select a flight. There is no flight out of Porto. I had a flight and then it disappeared.
This is quite scary.
It genuinely was. And then I got sent an email telling me to click on a link. And when I clicked on the link, my phone gave me a warning and said, be careful that this site might be cloned. So obviously didn't touch it with a barge pole. So then I log into their website to try to manage the disruption through the website, not the app. That kept sending me back to the app that just kept saying, oops, sorry, you can't manage your booking. So this was going on for quite a while. And I eventually just rebooked a brand new flight, but nothing out of Porto, nothing with other airlines out of Porto. So it was a case of having to go to Lisbon, but there aren't flights every day to Bristol from Lisbon. So we've got a flight tomorrow evening.
Who's we? How many people are in your group? What's the family?
There's just 2 of us.
Okay.
There's just 2 of us, myself and my partner.
So you haven't got screaming kids or anything like that, which would add to the stress levels?
No, dear God. I don't know how anybody with families would do this. And I kept saying to Paolo, we are in a better position. You speak Portuguese. You are Portuguese. There's just the 2 of us.
Did he need reminding of that?
He needed a lot of reminding of that in a crisis.
Did you say, Paolo, relax, you're Portuguese. We can get through this.
Absolutely, because in the train station in Porto, there was a woman saying to the guy, I don't speak Portuguese. And he's saying to her, I don't speak English. And she's trying to buy a train ticket. So I said that we've none of that. And thankfully, Portuguese public transport, which I didn't realise was actually really good and very reasonable. So there was a train every hour going from Porto to Lisbon for about €30.
Okay.
Perfect. So we managed to get to Lisbon and then got a ferry from Lisbon to Paolo's mum's house. So we're like planes, trains and automobiles. But if we didn't have that contact, James, I can't imagine, because they're like, you got to get receipts for everything you're spending. So
to get your money back from the airline, and that's going to be another bunch of hoops to jump through. Okay, thank you. I mean,
you're welcome.
I'm not going to ask you whether I should cancel my holiday yet. I'm going to ask you simply whether, if I gave you a time machine and you could go back a fortnight, would you have gone on this holiday?
I would say yes, only because we have a contact in Portugal. If we had no contacts, as in a place to stay in Lisbon, then the answer would be no.
As in a normal holiday, in other words, when you're not travelling with a loved one who is from that country originally. Anne-Marie, I hope you get home sooner rather. Well, I hope you get home tomorrow. I really do. But that's an astonishing opening call, isn't it? A perfectly normal hop, skip, and a jump with a travel company to Portugal, and you're still there. You should have been back yesterday evening. Ben's in Brighton. Ben, what do you reckon?
The last time we spoke, I was in Alicante, and I only just flew back very recently, James.
Okay.
And
you've got a place there, haven't you? You weren't there on holiday.
Yeah.
You've got
I've got a place there, so I go backwards and forwards.
Yeah, I thought so.
I'm doing a lot of work on it at the minute, yeah?
All right.
During the pandemic, by the way, I flew over there, and up to now, I think I've flown in and out 26 times, 13 times there and back sort of thing.
Okay.
The last two flights have been the worst. But the very last flight, coming out, we were all summoned to the plane at exactly the right time. It was leaving about around midday. It was supposed to leave around midday. We got on the aeroplane. The pilot was lovely. She's a female pilot. She said, listen, the aircon's gone wrong, but don't worry. Once we're in the air, we can siphon in cool air, and
we can open the windows. Go on.
The aircon had gone wrong.
Yeah.
And it was supposed to be 3 or 4 minutes. It turned out to be 48 minutes, by which time the fellow next to me had one of those G-Shock watches that tells you what the ambient temperature is. The temperature had risen to about 46, 47 degrees. It was insane.
This is a bit unique, though. This isn't a systemic problem. Give me the stuff, because that's bad luck. That could happen even when the flights are taking off and landing as normal. So give me the big picture. Analysis quickly.
The problem is basically the fact that they don't have enough staff. They're just completely lacking in staff. So they didn't have enough people to get us onto the plane on time, which meant that we got stuck behind other planes.
And then the queues get fractious and the checks are awful. What airline were you flying with, if you don't mind me asking?
EasyJet.
Yeah, that's 2 for 2 for EasyJet, because a lot of people are telling me about the hire and fire scheme that British Airways brought in during the furlough. A lot of people who have a distinct whiff, I won't say gammon necessarily, but a distinct whiff of Brexit about them, desperate to argue that this has absolutely nothing to do with the fact that we abolished free movement or that we pulled out of the single market. You're very silly, but obviously there'll be other factors that have contributed to this as well. Otherwise, there wouldn't be problems happening in other countries too. But just mentioning, I don't know what EasyJet did with regard to hiring and firing, but the situation extends far beyond a single company. Ben, take care. 10:30 is the time already. Holly Harris has your headlines. 10:33 is the time. That incident in Berlin, Germany. One person is dead, CNN is reporting. German authorities saying at least 30 injured after a vehicle drove into a crowd near a church in Berlin. The vehicle struck people outside the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church earlier this morning, approximately, I think, 9:30 our time. That's according to a spokesperson for the Berlin Fire Brigade, as reported on CNN. So keep you across. No indication yet whether it was an accident or an attack, but we will, of course, keep you across that story as and when it develops. Well, it's not back to Blighty, actually, is it? It's not back to Britain. It's back to people who were hoping to be in Britain and aren't or weren't. And the simple question of what is going on with our holidays? And should we actually be thinking about cancelling them, or at least rearranging? Duncan's in West Byfleet. Duncan, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, I just want to tell you about our experience we had for half-term. We went away for a half-term holiday with the family, my wife and I and 2 kids. We arrived to the airport on Saturday evening, ready to obviously fly back to the UK, and our flight was cancelled.
Where were you flying back from?
Gran Canaria.
Okay, and what was the gap of time between being told it was cancelled and when you were expecting to be taking off, if you see what I mean?
Nothing. We just arrived Saturday evening, looked at the board, as you do for the flights, and it just said cancelled.
So you hadn't been texted about it or contacted?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
Oh, mate, that's like some sort of anxiety dream, isn't it?
It was, a bit special. So we phoned Wizz Air. They said, oh, yes, you've got a choice. You can we can cancel the flat and pay your money back, or we can fly you back on the 11th. Bearing in mind, my daughter had GCSEs all week.
Oh, no, so, we're in that zone as well. In fact, that I mean, not to sound smug, but that's one of the reasons why we didn't go away for half term, actually.
Well, we thought coming back Saturday evening, plenty of time. She was off Monday anyway. She didn't have an exam until Tuesday.
Oh, no, that's
fine. The only flight
then.
we could get was via Zurich. She had to stay overnight in Zurich.
Wow.
Obviously, flights and hotel costs and everything. And we arrived yesterday, and she missed maths and geography yesterday.
Oh, no. I'm so sorry.
She was not happy.
I bet. And how, I mean, just as a dad to dad, actually, rather than it being of particular interest to anybody else, but how is that going to be accommodated by the exam board or the school? Do you know yet?
Well, we got hold of the school almost straight away as soon as we heard, and so via email, and they're going to get hold of the exam board.
Right.
Whether or not we're going to be successful or not, who knows?
It's the last thing she needs. Stressful enough without having this added.
Yeah.
Oh, boy. And, I mean,
shocking.
That's powerful enough as it stands. What's your understanding of why it happened, Duncan? And, of course, we need to stress that there'll be plenty of people potentially stuck in Gran Canaria not lucky enough to be able to hop on a flight to Zurich. Even if you're going to get the refund, you've got to have the money there in the first place in order to spend it and get it refunded.
Sure. We just logged it on a credit card and we probably spent about $3,000, I reckon.
Cool.
For food and accommodation. So it's doubled our holiday costs, obviously.
And then all the stress as well on top of that. What's your understanding of why it happened and how helpful were Wizz Air?
They were hopeless. They gave us no indication of why it happened. They just said, you can have a refund or we can fly you back on the 11th.
Sit tight. And make your own arrangements for accommodation between the 11th.
We stayed 2 nights in some B&B place in the middle of Gran Canaria.
Yeah.
And then flew to Zurich and then... Yeah, here we are. So today I'm going to try and chase Wizz Air or holiday insurance, try and get some cash back. But who knows?
Oh, boy. And why do you think it happened? Shortage of bodies? Bottlenecks?
I'm guessing they just overbooked.
Well, I'll ask someone in the industry how that works. And I wish your daughter all the very best, from the father of a GCSE student to the father of a GCSE student. That is just grossly unfair. It really is. 10:37 is the time, and I hope the exam board steps up and helps out, because the not knowing, of course, will be impacting on the revision that she's doing for the exams that she is going to be able to sit. Duncan, thank you. From Duncan to Darren, who's in the Angel. Darren, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, good morning, James. How are you doing?
Very well. I'm all right, mate. I'm in London. I'm golden. But if I was stuck in Gran Canaria or Lisbon this morning, I'd be feeling a little bit different.
This wouldn't be a bad place to be stuck, I reckon.
True. What's your story?
I was just calling. We were travelling back from Madeira, Portugal.
Oh yeah.
And the experience going out there was bad enough, and then coming back, we were delayed again. We had a 5-hour delay going out, and then coming back, we were delayed a further hour. And then when we actually landed, that's when you sort of thought, what's going on here? Because we were on the plane for an hour and a half, actually, before we could get off the plane.
Right.
And then after that, we had a 2-3 hour wait for luggage.
The luggage that you'd put on the plane that you couldn't fly on?
We had to wait an extra 3 hours just for the luggage to turn up.
Right. Oh, I see what you meant. So hang on, this is on the flight out?
No, this is in the flight back, James.
Yeah, so you got off the plane and then you had to wait for the luggage that you were expecting to be flying with. It wasn't... Sorry, I think you were clear. I'm just being a bit slow on the uptake. So then how did you get back then?
Oh, no. We've landed, obviously delayed coming back.
Yes.
And then the pilot was saying, we're going to have a bit of a delay, half an hour. An hour and a half later, we actually finally get off the plane. And then once we get to Gatwick, it's chaos. It's just like nobody's got their luggage. Everyone's sat around waiting for luggage. It's a total shambles, James.
Are you glad you went? If I gave you a time machine?
I'm actually glad we went, yeah.
Good. Even with all of that, because you really needed a holiday.
Well, yeah, my wife is a teacher. She works pretty hard, so...
I'm sure you do as well, Darren. I'd like your loyalty. And, well, I guess that is the problem, isn't it? You're doing the trade-offs now. I'm trying to think, well, how many hours would be worth it? 5 hours? 6 hours? Would it sleep? What, an overnight stay? Would it still be worth it? How many nights am I getting away for? Do we know now? I mean, more stories coming in, and we'll continue to canvass them, but perhaps a little nudge now towards why this is happening in big picture or little picture. scenarios. Gary is in Bradford. Gary, what can you tell us?
Oh, good morning, James.
Hello, Gary.
Long time listener, but nice to speak to you finally.
Likewise, mate.
So we're a family of 6, so we've got both myself and my wife, 4 children. We'd obviously been watching the news, heard all the horror stories, so we were obviously apprehensive before setting off on our holiday to Greece from Manchester Terminal 2. So we did what everybody else did, made sure we got there plenty early. And when we got there, we were met with the most horrendous, probably queue that took about 2 hours to get through before we even checked in, that left us an hour before boarding. And obviously, normally you'd use that time to have your nice drinks and something to eat before getting on the plane. But we then met with the security lines. This is all being done up as Terminal 2, but there must have been about 20 security check-ins, all state-of-the-art, but only 4 working. And they just kept running around saying, oh, you're going to be in this queue in an hour and a half, which meant we were going to be potentially late for his plane. No kind of finding out who was on what plane or anything, but luckily we kind of got through, saw the screen saying get to gate, so we thought great, but we hadn't had out to drink, we hadn't fed the kids, we'll feed them on the plane. So we then get to gate to just be literally sat there for 2.5 hours when it says come to gate. Nobody anywhere to at least tell you, because I mean you just want to know the truth. You can handle that, and you can let the kids know, right, let's go get a drink, let's go eat. But obviously you sat there waiting to be boarded, and eventually 2 young lads kind of turned up. Didn't look like they were even staff. Announced something on the tannoy that we couldn't understand, so everybody then had to go up and ask them what was going on.
Good grief.
Eventually gets on the plane. Luckily, because we'd had our flight change about 3 times, and it should have been a Chewy airline, but it got changed to a Spanish, which I think worked in our favour in the end.
Right.
So we sat on the plane, we're thinking, right, we're finally getting off. Literally sat on the plane for another hour and a half because they didn't have anybody to check in from, put the baggage on the plane.
Good grief.
But again, we're all on the plane, and we've got them all set up on iPads and chilled out. And then eventually we do take off, so you can start relaxing. And so they start bringing out the trolley. So I misheard. I thought we're getting a free drink. So I thought, oh, lovely, for a bit of obviously sorry for having us wait all this time. But it turned out that was the only drink that we were getting. And we should have been, yes. And even the cabin crew, she were lovely. She was so upset for everybody. She said, have you not been told by anyone that you're not going to get fed, not going to get any drink?
So you've got 4 hungry kids at this point and varying degrees of thirst. I'm going to run out of time. I'm going to hit the 10:40. You're making the most of your debut on the programme, Gary, I'll tell you. So you got there and then you had a holiday, a nice holiday in Greece.
It was a totally different experience in Greece. When you got there, they had everybody waiting for us. Security was straight through.
Right.
But on the way back, you're obviously worrying again that you're going to go through the same. It was just as bad, if not worse, coming back. So, but I know you've got probably lots of other callers.
No, I have. But just to clarify, you had delays at the Greek airport and then back.
No. Once we got into Greece.
No, but on the way back from Greece.
When we got back into Manchester,
all the problems were at this end.
No problem. And when we got it back to this end, it was like we were literally waiting 4 hours for our suitcases. Nobody came to tell us what.
I'm with you as a dad. I'm with you on this, and also my kids are a bit older now, so we'd be okay. But the younger they are, the bigger deal the food and the drink is.
James, 3 o'clock in the morning, there were just young kids asleep on our floor. It were horrible to see, and it were just everywhere. And then there were literally thousands of suitcases. I went up to look at one, and there were ones that said priority on them. They'd been there a week and a half waiting for collection. Why should we have to go collect our bags that haven't come off, at an extra expense to us?
No.
And the worst thing is, you can't speak to anybody in Chewy at all. They've done it in such a way online.
Well, I mean, it's always a nightmare trying to get hold of a human being in these sort of scenarios. But in these sort of holiday-type scenarios, you rarely need to. It's not as if you're trying to cancel your mobile phone contract or all of the things that are almost impossible to do these days because you go through so many different portals and websites. I mean, this is no consolation to you, Gary, but out of all the stories coming into the studio, yours is actually one of the mildest. But it's not what you pay for. It's certainly not what you expect. And holidays, I say it again, and I make no apology for this, they are anti-stress inventions. They are de-stressing exercises. They are supposed to send you home all replete and content and at one with the universe. Oh boy. I'm still not cancelling mine though, in case you were wondering. It's 10:45. It is 10:49. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We cross live to Berlin shortly, where if you're just joining us, at least one person is believed dead and several injured after a vehicle drove into a crowd in the west of the city. Unclear yet whether it was an attack or an accident. The man who has been detained by authorities was driving a small Renault car, according to Germany's Bild newspaper, and a police spokesman, Martin Dams, has reiterated it's currently unclear whether the incident was the result of an accident or whether the driver had intentionally driven into the crowd. Don't pinch yourself about the next thing I'm going to say, but actor John Barrowman, a former star, of course, of Doctor Who, is at the scene and has tweeted various film clips talking of multiple fatalities. This has been picked up by Sky News, but obviously you take this with a modicum of caution. He's tweeted that we think we have witnessed a terrorist attack here in Berlin. We're not sure. There are a lot of people all over the place. We've seen a car that came down the road and ended up in a storefront covering 3 city blocks. It's pretty horrific. So that is clearly an eyewitness account coming from the actor John Barrowman. There are police behind us, he adds. There are other police cars coming. There's helicopters coming in. This is bad. This is serious. And he suggests that there are multiple fatalities. But as I say, the authorities so far confirming only one. Back to the situation in our airports, the impact it's having on our holidays, and indeed the simpler question of whether or not you should be reviewing your plans. A lot of people in the industry saying, please don't. On the grounds that we're on our knees already, and if people start cancelling holidays that are likely to unfold hitch-free, and many will be, this is very much man bites dog territory. You're not going to ring me to tell me that your holiday went swimmingly and everything's absolutely fine, and have I got my postcard yet? Are you? So again, important to bear that in mind as well. Alex is in Horsham. Alex, what would you like to say?
James, pleasure to be on. Slightly nervous ringing up a man of such high intelligence in the journalism world, but nonetheless,
no one likes sarcasm, Alex. Go on.
Pleasure to be on. I just basically want to say that it's a real dismal situation that my industry is in at the moment.
Right.
What the public needs to understand is for the past 2 years, we've pretty much shut down. We've really reduced in scale, and there's been no demand there.
Yeah.
Most of the people that are travelling at the moment, it's not necessarily new bookings. A lot of the passengers that are travelling are going on holidays that they've had booked since 2020, 2021, and postponed. In addition to that, these greedy airlines have taken on more and more bookings, and they can't serve them.
Now, talk me through that. So this is the bit I don't quite get, in that what's in it for them to take on bookings that they kind of know on some level they're probably not going to be able to serve? Just keeping the money in the bank account for a bit of time? Or, I mean, I don't get that.
Essentially, yeah, just greed. And it's how the industry works. They oversell flights on the basis that 9 times out of 10, if you've got an aircraft that will seat 200 people,
yes,
not all 200 people will turn up.
No, but that involves a few people being turned away at the gate or offered a bonus scheme. It's happened to me. It doesn't involve the entire flight being cancelled. I don't get the leap from the overbooking as normal business practice to entire flights being cancelled, if you follow me.
The flight cancellations are generally because they haven't physically got the staff to operate the flight.
So there's way more than one problem going on here.
Yeah. There's absolutely more than one problem. It's a combination of things. But the second point I'd like to raise is that the lack of staff in the industry is going to be here to stay, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you're right.
The queues that we see, the cancellations that we see are going to last around 18 months. And I'll quickly explain why. At the moment, every company is drastically recruiting individuals in numbers.
Yeah.
We're an industry that needs specific skill set in customer service, the operation of machinery, security, pilots, air traffic controllers, cabin crew. They're all fairly quite skilled people that need a lot of experience. If you recruit individuals in mass numbers, you won't get experience. What will happen is this summer will pass. These people will come in attracted by the cheap flights they're offered, the silly £1,000 bonuses that our nation's flag carrier is currently offering people to come and work from. It's somewhat hilarious that a flag carrier of our country is so desperate to recruit. I don't know why that is. It's almost as if you think people want to work for them, isn't it?
Yes.
So what will happen is, at the end of the summer, all of these people that came in with no experience, attracted by all of these things, will realise, you know what? this summer's been pretty tough. I've been shouted at by passengers. There's queues everywhere. I don't want to work in aviation. I can get more money doing something else. I've not got to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to do it. Why would I not want to do that? Those people will all then leave, and we'll be back in the same situation that we're in now.
That will apply more the further down the qualification line you go, won't it? I mean, it's going to be the people on the coalface, the people in the front line, customer facing, the ones who need the least training and the least qualifications that are most likely to churn in the way that you describe and
absolutely
kick the can down
keeps the industry going, James.
I know it is. I'm just
what puts people on planes. The people that have called up to tell you that their flights have been cancelled. That's why, because there's no one to check them in. There's no one to load their bags. You know, the British public work hard. We're a country that loves travelling.
Yes.
We should be really proud of our aviation industry. The economic stability that it comes in, it's amazing. We should be proud of that. But at the moment, companies like our flag carrier, others as well, our airports, we can't serve the public.
It's a complete shambles. And I mean, 18 months sounds optimistic to me under this reading of the situation, because where are all these people going to come from?
I agree with you. I think quite simply, James, the best thing, and if you are an airport employer, you're an airline, you're a recruiter, and you're listening to this, please pay your staff what they deserve and treat them with some respect. And maybe, just maybe, your recruitment will be easier and people will stay with you.
That's the key. I mean, the stickability of the job seems to me to be the big story moving forward, rather than the shortages at the moment. It's the likelihood of these gaps being filled temporarily or inadequately. And of course, we've abolished free movement, and Grant Shapps has refused to add this industry to the long and growing list of industries where they're pretending, or at least trying to allow people to avoid all the benefits of Brexit by...
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think Brexit is part of the issue. I think it's been masked a little bit by the pandemic.
Of course. Listen, it's not going to be the sole cause of anything, but you show me a problem and I'll show you how Brexit made it worse. Just to be clear, what's your role in the industry? If you don't mind telling me, you don't have to.
So I used to work at Gatwick Airport.
Right.
I now work at Heathrow. I work in ground handling.
Right. So you're right up against it then?
Yeah, I deal with lots of things in the logistics sort of environment. I liaise with all the sort of roles that I've just mentioned.
Yeah.
And I see day in, day out what's going on, and I just sit back and I think, what has our industry become? You know, we've got a real chance now, James, to recover from the pandemic with soaring demand. But we can't serve our customers that have paid good money in the way they deserve.
It's amazing, isn't it?
I think what's absolutely just hilarious is that this country's flag carrier, and I'm not going to name them because I'm not sure I probably should on the radio, but
it depends what you say.
Their slogan is to fly to serve.
Yeah.
Are they doing that right now?
No, I mean, you've as good as named them, but I don't think you've said anything that's actionable. We'll soon find out. What are you going to do for your summer holiday this year, if you don't mind me asking?
Currently, I've got nothing booked.
Oh, God, that's not what we wanted to hear.
I've been lucky. I've travelled.
Yes.
I'm keeping working because I enjoy what I do. It's been my life since I left college.
No, I can tell
my passion.
that. It shines
through.
But
I just think it's just sad to see the state that we're currently in. And I can only apologise to the public that turn up to an airport and see and have to go through it, because it's not the same in Europe. It's not the same elsewhere. But it just seems that through nothing else other than greed, misjudgment and mismanagement of companies that were in the industry during the pandemic, we're now in this situation. And the staff that are left behind, getting paid peanuts, quite frankly, for what they do, are going through so much, and it's really sad.
It is, and as you say, the suggestion that there might be a light at the end of the tunnel 18 months from now seems a tad optimistic. It is 10:57. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Katie is in Kingston. Katie, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Sorry, first-time caller, very nervous.
Don't apologise, you'll be fine.
The reason I picked up the phone was your original question as to whether people should review their travel plans.
I wish I hadn't asked that now, but here you are.
My answer would be, yes, if you need to get back for something,
don't
leave
risk
yourself.
it.
Plenty of time, don't risk it. My daughter had her GCSE exam this Tuesday. Our flight from Mallorca with EasyJet was cancelled on Sunday morning.
Oh, no.
Thank goodness for Trainline. I just typed in trains from Barcelona to Paris.
Yes.
We sorted it out. We bought the tickets. We then had to get off the island. There was one ferry leaving that day from Alcudia to Barcelona. Luckily, our villa was very near Alcudia. We got on it.
Wow.
We then spent 6 hours on the ferry. We then spent 15 hours on a coach with no toilet to Paris that was packed. At Paris, we then got a taxi to a train station. I think it was the train station at Charles de Gaulle Airport. We then got a train to Lille. And then at Lille, we got the Eurostar. We arrived back at 5 o'clock on Monday evening to a tube strike. We waited 1.5 hours for a taxi at St Pancras to get us to Waterloo, which we then got on our train home to Kingston. We arrived at 7:30 Monday night, approximately 36 hours after we left our villa. And she went to her maths GCSE.
With her eyes on stalks, how did she get on?
She said it was okay. Good. The first one was a shocker, but this one was okay, thank goodness.
But it's not the ideal preparation.
Anyone is, if you do need to be back for something as important as, say, an exam that you can't retake, or work, or lots of reasons, either leave yourself plenty of time, or review it, because there were no flights out of Mallorca.
I can't fault what you're saying. I don't want to concur with you or agree with you, but you're the one that's just done it, and so you are supremely qualified to make the comments that you just made.
Going back to your previous caller's comments, the situation is bad in Europe. We were on a coach with people trying to get back to Stuttgart, to Rotterdam. A lot of people were in the same situation, and they weren't necessarily going to the UK.
No, of course. I mean, the airports work in both directions, don't they? You've got people coming in and people coming out. I think, as far as I can tell, the UK is being hit much harder than other countries, but the idea that other countries are not being hit at all. Dublin, I think, in particular, has had well-documented problems. Thank you, Katie. Oh, boy. I don't know what I'm going to do on this one. I think we'll move on. An awful lot of people still waiting to talk, and we must get over live to Berlin for an update on the situation there. 1 dead and 30 injured is the latest report on this incident that is not clear yet whether it's an accident or an attack after a vehicle drove into a crowd near a church in Berlin. But staying with the stories that were in front of us when we came onto the radio this morning, there's another brouhaha surrounding censorship, religion and cinema. I think we'll get stuck into that after this. It is 4 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where this is a conversation that we've had a million times over the years. If you're not familiar with this programme, we tend to have this conversation in exactly the same terms and tone, regardless of which members of which religion it is that are complaining about something cultural or artistic. So, for example, you will be possibly surprised to learn that in all of the years that I've been doing this job, I've heard people call for plays, musicals, entertainments to be banned or to be censored or not to be shown on the BBC because they contained jokes about Jesus. There was a superb piece of art called Jerry Springer, the Opera, written by the inimitable Stuart Lee, and a flipping heck, I hate it when I do that, a composer whose name I have temporarily forgotten, but the hive mind will no doubt remind me imminently. And it contained one song which suggested that Jesus might be, and I think I quote correctly, a little bit gay. And many people were up in arms about that, including some of the usual suspects with their newspaper columns and their shows. I think there was a story in Birmingham about a play that many Sikhs were unhappy with being boycotted and protested against and shut down. Even more ridiculously, perhaps, if you don't follow these things closely, when I was at my Catholic school in the 1980s, the Monty Python film Life of Brian was very much banned. It was literally a confiscatable offence to have a VHS of Life of Brian and punishable. I don't think you'd have got suspended or sent home for a fortnight, but it was quite a big deal. And Life of Brian is a very silly and funny comedy, which sort of takes the Bible as a starting point, but really doesn't do anything that I would consider to be vaguely blasphemous. And partly because I went to that school, I'm pretty confident I know why this stuff happens. I think it happens because religious leaders are actually conscious, whether this is explicitly or implicitly, they're actually conscious how fragile the belief structures can be. So if something cultural comes along, and I think, didn't Nikos Kazantzakis' Last Temptation of Christ posit the notion that Jesus didn't die in the crucifixion, but instead went on to have a family with one of the Marys? I could be wrong. There is certainly a superb piece of work that makes that suggestion. Philip Pullman's written an amazing book called The Good Man Jesus, the I'm going to go. Why am I trying to pull all these cultural references out at the top of my head when I'm going to make mistakes? The Good Man Jesus, the Scoundrel Christ, is that it? The Philip Pullman book? I don't know. But why do religious leaders get so upset about art that, I don't know, threatens them? Answer: because they are deep down aware of how fragile the belief structures are. So what you have now is a cinema chain that's cancelled all screenings of a film about the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad after its branches were picketed by Muslim activists. And it's a slightly different story from the one that you might be expecting, because it is Sunni Muslims who are upset about the portrayal of key figures in the history of their branch of Islam as being somehow the ancestors of Islamic State or ISIS. So the people protesting, I choose my words quite carefully, but the people who are unhappy about this are not the people who are normally associated, or from the same branch of Islam that are normally associated with loud behaviour and or violence. I want to know what we think about the cinema chain. And I want to do this quite intelligently, because the film, which is called The Lady of Heaven, has been cancelled according to Cineworld in order to ensure the safety of our staff and customers. So I don't know how many cinemas it was on in, and I don't know how relevant this is to the broader conversation, but I'll tell you what, trying to find a decent screening of Aha the movie at the moment is really, really difficult. I'm probably going to head to Barnes quite late this evening to catch what I seem to be one of the only and final screenings of what is clearly going to be a cinematic masterpiece, because it features Mags Morton and Paul in the Olympic cinema over there. But I don't know how many screens it was on, so I don't know in statistical terms how big this story is. But the notion of a cinema chain cancelling a screening of a film because of protests is something about which we should all be a little bit concerned. Here is a report from Five Pillars, which is a Muslim news site, containing a photograph which backs up the words. 200 Muslims protesting against sectarian hate film Lady of Heaven outside Cineworld in Broad Street, Birmingham on Sunday. So, you know, there's a pretty strong value judgment contained within that statement by calling it a sectarian hate film. They're nailing their colours pretty firmly to the mast. There is another element of blasphemy contained within the film, because it does have the face of the Prophet Muhammad on screen. No actor is singled out as playing him in the film, and I think his face is partly generated by CGI, but that is, of course, something that is considered to be blasphemous by many Muslims, any portrayal or depiction of their Prophet Muhammad. It's suggested that the fact that the film is shown in dazzling sunbursts and is computer generated should be enough to placate the prohibition on visual representations of the Prophet. I don't know enough to comment on that, but because it's a Shia aligned film, it's unlikely that people would be as upset about that as they would be if it were a Sunni aligned film. I think I've got that the right way around. I may not have done. I'm not, fully au fait with all of the wrinkles and relevant issues contained within this story. That's what the phones are for. A screening in Bolton was cancelled after 100 protesters turned up at the Cineworld branch. So, look, there's two, or at least two conversations to be had here, quite possibly three. One of which is this. If you were running the cinema chain and a bunch of really angry people were outside protesting against the film going on inside, regardless of what that film was about or why those people were protesting, what would you do? So if you are passionately committed to cultural freedom and you believe in freedom of expression and this film should be broadcast despite all threats and all protests, I don't know that you've got the right to tell a spotty kid on minimum wage that it's her job to man the barricades. I'm sorry, I'll remove spotty from that observation. That's not fair at all. I'm going to stick with a kid on minimum wage. And also, I don't know if you go to the cinema much, but they're not very well manned these days. You know, you'll have someone on the gate covering all the screens quite often. You won't have anyone checking your tickets as you go into the individual screenings. I'll be honest with you, I tend not to go to very, very oversubscribed flea pits on a Saturday night. I tend to slide into, boutique cinemas for daytime screenings, or if I go with the kids, then we might hit Westfield occasionally or something like that. but it's always checked on the way. There's just not a lot of bodies there. So I think the third conversation marries the two together, because you can say, in principle, should any cinema chain ever pull a film because it offends the religious sensibilities of some people who are by no means required to watch it? That's ridiculous, right? You're really upset about this film that you don't have to watch. That's where blasphemy becomes a really difficult issue to discuss honestly. So that's question number one. Should the cinema chain, in principle, ever do this? Because I might answer no. In principle, no cinema chain should ever do this. But then you've got the in practice question, which becomes, who's going to ensure that everybody is safe in a cinema outside which hundreds of people are protesting? And again, I don't think it matters who they are or what they're protesting about. It's the reality of the protest that informs the practice element of this question. In practice, is it fair to expect 16-year-old Keith in his holiday job to deal with the protesting crowds outside and, of course, then possibly inside? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. So you've got the question about whether in principle a cinema chain should ever do this, and then you've got the simple question of whether actually in practice it's ridiculous not to do this, because you're asking teenagers on minimum wage to essentially become a combination of nightclub bouncers and religious police. 0345 6060 973. Feel free to tell me a little bit more about the film if you so desire. And if you weren't wondering what I think about this, I think it is absolutely ridiculous to close down a film or to stop screening of a film because some people's religious sensibilities are offended. When you can prove to me conclusively that A, God exists, and B, they're really unhappy about this film, then I might review my position. But right now, if you really do believe in an all-knowing, all-powerful divine being, I'm fairly confident that he/she is going to be supremely relaxed about a film. Just as I'm supremely confident that Jesus or God, I was raised in the Christian faith, were not going to be kept awake at night by Jerry Springer the Opera or Monty Python's Life of Brian. It seems to me absolutely absurd to simultaneously believe in an omniscient, all-powerful, an omniscient, omnipotent, supernatural being, while also believing that you have to protect them from films and artworks because they're so thin-skinned and sensitive that they might not be able to cope with the trauma of watching a Monty Python film or a film called The Lady of Heaven or indeed Jerry Springer the Opera. You may disagree with that, but as I say, I don't think you're going to change my position unless you can prove beyond all reasonable doubt that God definitely exists and also would be really unhappy about this film. And even then, I'd probably insist on letting me speak to God so that I could ask him or her whether or not they were really so troubled by a film that they didn't want anybody on the world that they created to watch the film about which we are talking. 0345 6060 973. There are no blasphemy laws in this country, as far as I'm aware. So question number 3 becomes a weird one, and this is where I'm afraid you're probably going to attack me for pretending or thinking that I'm still in a philosophy seminar from my decades-old university education. I think you just have to pick one or the other. If you can't answer the second question, then the practice cancels out the principle. Don't you think? Unless you can tell me how this cinema chain, how these teenagers on minimum wage are supposed to cope with hundreds of protesters outside a cinema, then you have to approve of the decision that the cinema has taken in practical terms, even though in principle you might find it, as I do, abhorrent. It's not how phone-ins are supposed to work, are they? Actually reflecting reality, nuance, rather than just offering up a lazily constructed target and inviting people to either lob rotten tomatoes at it or try and defend it from the rotten tomatoes. It is ridiculous for a cinema chain to cancel a film because people are protesting. It is ridiculous for people to protest about a film on the grounds that it's going to offend their God. But equally, it is ridiculous to expect teenagers to somehow exercise the crowd control that would be necessary to keep these screenings open. There's a slim chance that for the first time ever, I've just covered every single angle that you might offer up in response to the topic that I've introduced and the questions that I'm asking. There's only one way to find out. 0345 6060 973. It's 11:16. It is 19 minutes after 11, and before we get stuck into this story of censorship and cinemas, we're going to cross live to Berlin, where Trent Murray, LBC's reporter in the city, is on the scene of this incident that unfolded at about 10:30 this morning, local time, about 9:30 here, seeing a vehicle drive into a crowd of people, leaving, we believe, Trent, one person dead according to the authorities and several injured. What's the very latest?
Yeah, well, that's right, James. I'm just in Charlottenburg in West Berlin, and anyone that's familiar with the city knows it's a very busy area for pedestrians to go shopping and for outdoor dining. But we know, as you say, at about 10:30 local time, this car has left the road and ploughed into a crowd that was on that pedestrian street. Now, the rescue helicopter has just left the scene. We know that one person has been confirmed killed, and police are saying that dozens are injured. No word yet on the intention of this car and what the driver was doing. We know he has been arrested and is in custody at the moment. But of course, what has, I think, shaken the city a little bit is that this incident has essentially occurred right at the very same spot that that truck ploughed into a crowd in 2016 at the Christmas market. So a lot of questions around, is that just a coincidence, or what has happened? But certainly pedestrians here, people, I've been speaking to, I've only arrived in the past 15 minutes, are all making the same comment that, the fact that it's occurred where it is really quite frightening. And, police, as I say, are just trying to work out what has gone wrong.
Of course. What I hope this isn't a silly question, Trent, and be gentle with me if it is, but why would there be crowds in place at 9:30 on a Wednesday morning? For example, I can see why there'd be huge crowds at a Christmas market, but would it be commuters? Would it be shoppers? I just wonder if you have any insights on that.
No, well, look, it's a very good question because it is a pretty busy part of town for several reasons. I mean, all of the high-end stores generally have got their store around here. It's kind of surrounded by the big labels. The city's main big Apple store is there, for example. And then you've also got the Berlin Zoo just across the road. So it's kind of popular both with Berliners to go and do shopping, but also very popular with tourists. And, I have to say, James, I myself have just noticed in the past couple of weeks, there's a lot more tourists in Berlin now. I think as, all of those COVID travel restrictions loosens, a lot more people from America and other parts of the world that hadn't really been here in the past 2 years. So the city feels busier. It's a lovely spring morning right now. The sun is out. And so it's understandable that people would be out maybe having a late breakfast, doing a bit of shopping, etc. But obviously been rocked by this terrible incident.
And again, I'm not sure you'll be able to answer this, but I mean, how long ordinarily would we expect the authorities to take to offer a little bit more guidance on whether it were accident or attack?
Well, I think it's probably not too far away. And the reason I say that is there is some local media starting to report that the driver tried to run away on foot after crashing the vehicle in the end into it like a drugstore. Now, it's understood, again, I have to preface this, I can't confirm this myself, but some local media saying passers-by essentially tackled the man and then held him until police arrived. If that is indeed the case, well, then that probably points towards some sort of at least motive or intent or something taking place where it was intentional. So I would imagine the police will probably give a press conference in the next couple of hours to try and give us a bit more insight into whether this was an accident or whether this was something a little bit more sinister.
Indeed, in which case, no doubt, we'll be speaking to you again on LBC. Trent Murray, many thanks indeed, live, as I say, from Berlin for LBC, where a vehicle has been driven into a crowd of people outside a store in the west of the city, leaving, according to authorities, one dead and several injured. More on that story throughout the day as and when it develops. Now, back to the conversation in hand, which is, I think, breaking down very neatly along three central questions. In principle, should a cinema chain ever pull a film or cancel a film, whether it is this one, which has offended Sunni Muslims, chiefly, for the portrayal of key figures in the origins of their branch of Islam, or A Clockwork Orange, of course, was banned until very, very recently, withdrawn permanently, actually, in the UK, and not shown legally here until after Kubrick's death, although it was the director that pulled that after sensational news reports linked it to murder cases. You've got Life of Brian, you've got David Cronenberg's Crash. These were not accused of blasphemy, Life of Brian was. And people often forget this because it wasn't actually filmed, but all sorts of self-appointed guardians of anti-woke culture, as they have subsequently become, had their knickers in a right old twist about Jerry Springer the Opera. So in principle, should this ever happen, and in practice, can a cinema do any differently if there are 200 people protesting outside and a bunch of teenagers on work experience inside charged with dealing with the situation. One quick point, this is unsigned. It says, "Oh, James, I have to take issue with your take on the cinema story. There are no 16-year-olds in the world called Keith." That's a fair point. Abdul's in Milton Keynes. Abdul, what made you pick up the phone?
Hey man, how you doing?
Pretty good. What's on your mind?
Basically, so I just wanted to obviously talk about this film. Unlike many people, I've actually seen this film, and I am Muslim, but I wasn't really offended by it. But I want to kind of flip.
Are you Sunni
Muslim?
Yes. So that's relevant. That's a relevant question, I think, isn't it?
I wanted to kind of flip your thought process on it a little bit. We kind of have three, we have four caliphs, but three caliphs who they basically show in this. All of those caliphs are basically played by black actors. They belong to the same tribe as all of the other characters in the film because they're all the Quraysh tribe, right?
Yes.
The actors that are portrayed as the goodies in this film, the heroes in this film, are all portrayed by white European actors.
Really?
Right? Yes.
And just bring it back now. Of course, I haven't seen the film, Abdullah. I'm a radio presenter having a phone in about it. I can't go and watch the bloody film, mate. What sort of an amateur do you think I am? Honestly, when you say the goodies and the baddies, hang on a sec. Just talk us through that through the lens of Islamic history, will you? Because you'll know a lot more about it than most of my listeners.
Yeah. So basically, we have a number of caliphs. We basically have Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, we have Umar.
You need to remind us what an actual caliph is first, I think.
A caliph is basically, so after the death of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we basically have this, we have a takeover of a leader, basically. Yeah. And the first caliph takeover was Abu Bakr, and then we had Uthman, and then we had Umar after that. And basically, like we had a number of caliphs that kind of took over. So what happens in this is in Shia Islam, these are kind of portrayed as there's two different branches. So what in Shia is basically like you need to follow the bloodline of the Prophet, right? Whereas with Sunnis is basically more of a democratic, like the people choose their leader, right? So
and because this is a Shia affiliated film, the caliphs from the Sunni tradition are portrayed as baddies.
Yeah, they're very treacherous, really backstabbing and stuff.
And they're also, you believe, deliberately darker skinned than the caliphs who would be from the Shia tradition.
Well, they're black actors. They're black actors, and the other ones are all European white.
That's just weird. I don't get that. No, okay.
The other thing as well is when they portray. I know a lot of people are talking about blasphemy, but.
Not really. I'm not. I think I understand why the prohibition on visual representations of the Prophet has probably been ducked by the use of CGI and dazzling sunbursts and the rest of it. That's not what people outside the cinemas are protesting about, is it?
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing though. One thing I know about cinemas is basically what they do is that they actually do put a lot of these films kind of out because they probably thought, okay, you know what, we've got this studio that's pitching this film about Islamic history, and we've got an area with all these Muslims in it. They're going to love this. We're going to make some money. I mean, you know how badly cinemas have done over the past couple of years with the pandemic.
So they just thought, oh, it's a Muslim film. We're in a Muslim. Let's stick it on in Bolton and Birmingham. We'll be golden.
Yeah. But that's the thing. This is the thing that really stuck out in my mind. Is like I said, I wasn't really offended by it. I basically watched it because I was like, okay, Islamic history. I just really want. I watch everything with Islamic history in it. But one thing that really stood out is I was like, why on earth have they basically made the bad guys who are from it's like kind of like, say, I don't know if you have a brother or sister or whatever, but kind of like you're you and then your brother or sister being portrayed as a different race.
And it's unlikely to be an exercise in colourblind wokery, I think you're suggesting. So it's not like Hamilton casting a lot of actors of colour in roles portraying white people from history. In a sentence,
honestly, I don't get it.
I get that's a fascinating insight. And I sense we're probably on the same page in the tension here between the principle and the practice of showing it in cinemas. But if you can, and I appreciate that there may be different motivations for different people, what exactly are these crowds in Birmingham and Bolton protesting about?
So basically they're protesting about the fact that it's a very kind of sectarian film. So what in effect it is basically showing that the reason why the Shia kind of part of Islam is the one that is the correct one is because the fact that all of these other characters there were very treacherous. They showed like
so it's anti-Sunni propaganda.
It's pretty much, yeah. But this is the thing, like I was saying to your producer there just before, is that when I was quite surprised when I turned on the radio and I'd heard you and also Nick talking about it, because I was like, I saw this film like a while back, like about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and nobody I talked to had seen it, and I've got the feeling that basically if this was released, nobody talked about it. It probably would have made
whipped up on some website somewhere, and it grows slowly, and then the protests turn up. No doubt, people who, unlike you, haven't seen the film are protesting about it because someone's whipped them up into righteous indignation. And the reason why we're talking about it is because when a cinema pulls a film for censorious or blasphemous or whatever reasons it may be, that's a bigger story than any film.
Yeah, and I don't think many people would have watched it otherwise. I think it just would have been like,
so
okay,
it's good marketing.
Kind of
I think. I mean, it would be, except that I don't know how many screens it's still on. Abdul, thank you. I've got a much better idea now of what the film is about. Although, with respect to Abdul, not a fully clear idea on why people are so upset, because it's a film. It portrays people